And we're back,
And
full
we're
of
back.
Loco Burrito.
Local burrito.
How was that, sir?
That was fantastic. Place here in Longmont, Colorado. If you're ever there, it's a good place to go. They got fantastic Mexican food.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It gets us in the mind for Chinese martial arts conversations. There's nothing like a good burrito to get you going. What are we talking about today, my friend?
Well, first, let's do some housekeeping.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. Got the dust on the wall. Let's talk about our email. We have our email at kungfuconversations@gmail.com. We have our Instagram account, KF Conversations. You can find us on Instagram. We also have a Threads account now, so you can check us out through Instagram too for Threads. We have a Facebook account, Kung Fu Conversations. We have a YouTube account, Kung Fu Conversations, where you can check out our new shows. We're doing something new with a little bit with our formats. So on our YouTubes, we're going to try to drop we always drop the interviews later before our Spotify posts and things like that. And I think we're going to try to do the whole interview in one shebang now. So see what you think about that. I'm working on our Teespring account, so that's down right now, but I will get that back up and hopefully with some new artwork as well. So that one's on me, but we still have our Buy Me a Coffee account. We are at Kung Fu Con Pod. And then, sir, you have your school, Boulder Internal Arts.
I do.
Yeah, could you tell us a little bit about that?
Boulder Internal Arts. I have a blog out there on the internet, and that's the best way to reach me. The other thing is, we are doing a Facebook for Kung Fu Conversations. I also have Facebook for my school, which is also a good way to look for it. I also have a little YouTube channel, and I'm on Instagram.
Awesome. So I am Red Force Chinese Boxing, and you can find me on all the social medias. And I'm always tagging myself and Owen over at Kung Fu Conversations. House is cleaned.
House is cleaned. So what are we talking about today?
Today we are going to talk about teachers and their different periods of teaching.
Mm-hmm.
I really look at this. I'm a big jazz fan, and I look at this like maybe like somebody like Miles Davis. When Kinda Blue came out, it was revolutionary at the time.
Yep.
But then 20-something years later, Bitches Brew comes out, also revolutionary at the time. And so, was it all Miles Davis? Yes. Was it the same music being produced and coming out? Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, it was to the point where it was almost like a different person was playing the same instrument. Mm-hmm. And I would dare say that really good teachers that are trying to focus on their own interpretation and their own relationship with their art, as well as trying to pass that on and their understanding and their growth in the art to their students, is not going to be fixed.
I think, for example, Gao Yisheng, right? Gao Style Bagua. Gao Yisheng had a lot of different periods in his teaching evolution, his personal evolution as a martial artist. And, he has people, even today, there are lineages out there who are from his younger periods. Mm. So, he had initially started out learning his village style, and then he moved and he went and found a person who would teach him Bagua, but that person only taught him single palm change for like 3 years, so he quit and he moved on, and then he ended up studying Li Sun Yi at some point, learning Xing Yi, which I'm sure influenced his straight line forms later, and then got lucky and found a student of Chung Ching Hua and studied with him, and then also went and studied with Chung himself. So, and that was just his learning process. So then his teaching process, when he first started out, I think he went back to his village and was teaching Bagua there, and then he moved around a little bit, and then ended up 20 years later plus in Tianjin. And so, and even in Tianjin, he was there for, I think, another 20 years or so, and he had several iterations of senior students and people who studied with him during that time, and his system changed a lot. His system initially didn't have a lot of straight line sets, and then he created more straight line sets, and he changed and modified some of his circle Shintian sets. And, each student from those different eras, group of students, I should say, really got different things from him. So when he was older, I think you're going to get something from a teacher that's going to be very different than when they're younger. And I think, that's really going to impact, how willing he was probably to, show application or spar as he got older. I think that the older teachers, they may still be willing to show that stuff, but they're not as interested. They may have other interests that come from there.
Or as capable. You were telling me a lot too that, that you feel like his later periods, he was super involved with the 2-man sets. And a lot of the 2-man set drills come out of that later period of understanding, which, you could argue it, but it almost sounds like a deeper refinement of previous material. And I think hopefully that's what a teacher does in their own practices. As far as Wing Chun goes, coming from the Ip Man line that I do, you had your first generation students that were taught a lot different. And, of course I'm not there. So a lot of this is hearsay and I take it with a grain of salt, but each of, the main core students were taught to their strengths. And, Yip Man was needing some kind of small reputation because, he wasn't going to be a police officer. He wasn't going to do this. And so the teaching became his, reluctant way of living. And so, advertisements needed to be out there. And not only was it newspaper articles, but, they were little friendly street fights and some not so friendly street fights. So your first generation of students were taught a little bit differently. You had this more, I wouldn't call it a rapid learning curve, but it was, hit the ground running. A lot from entry as well as the Chisao methodology was taught right away. And it was less, here's Sinam Tao, here's Chum Q, here's Buji. It's like, here's a hand, here's a hand, here's a hand, here's a bunch of different ways to use it. And then later on, what you might call a more traditional way of learning, and the second generation was formed. And then, you've got some embers of both of that in this final years. A lot of people will, it's wild. I'd call it funny, but it's not, especially if you're involved in some of these systems and their little piss poor wars. I call them the piss wars, if you will, upon each other. The first generation guys will knock the second generation guys and say, oh, well, those guys can't fight. And then the second generation guys will be like, well, those guys don't know how to teach, because they were just too worried about fighting. So they didn't get the whole system, and they don't know how to, they don't know how to teach. And the third generation's like, oh, well, we're the only ones that really got anything. And then the first and second will say the third generation didn't get anything because Yip Man was sick in those final years.
Right.
So it's the teaching style changes, and sometimes it has to do not just with the teacher expanding the system, but the needs of the students, right? So when he was first starting off, he didn't have a lot of students. Maybe a few over here and a few over there. But, if what I've heard and what I've read is correct, on the second generation, for a while there, he had a few hundred students here and there at a time. So your teaching model's not going to be the same.
Right.
You're not going to be able
That's a good point.
You're not going to be able to go around and cross hands or adjust everyone. And that's when you start having senior students that have been there for a while. You need a second set of hands and a second set of eyes and a second pair of mouths or more that will say what you want to be done in a certain way of your teaching style. So as more students started to walk through his door, he had to change his teaching methodologies.
That's such a good point. And I really think, my understanding of Gao's system is that as it evolved, and by the time he got to his Tanjin, and then certainly in his later Tanjin years, his system had expanded. Like, he'd added a lot of stuff. There was, there were several different layers or levels that he had his sort of Bagua for health, and then he had his, he would teach the Hotians, and then he had another level where he was just doing like applications, and then he had his final level, which was like his indoor level. And there's always a thing that said that his indoor students were the ones who always really got it, and I don't know if that's true or not, but just my experience in general in Chinese martial arts would point to the fact that, that you, just like you were just saying, it becomes difficult when you scale something, when it gets, it grows, to give more personalized instruction. And whether that's, crossing hands, or whether that's adjusting postures, or that's, it's just the bigger the group, the more difficult that is. And I know that as Gao became more famous and his class sizes got bigger, he would use his senior students like guys like, Wu Mengsha and guys like Jen Jingfeng, and those guys would help him teach in his classes. But I think that those different eras, and I really like your point about the class size, because I really think that that's going to make a huge impact on how you're going to transmit things and what you're going to do. And maybe in the beginning, you're just looking to get a few good students. Maybe that you need some good guys who can go out there and kind of help you make your name and build up the reputation of your school.
I've always had a weird concept on that's kind of uniquely mine, and I'm going to share this with you guys and the audience. Is the whole internal and external debate, and I sometimes wonder if it was less to do with the mechanics and the mindset and the chi and all the other stuff, and more to do with class size. Because, you look at, Form and Kata say, and I'm not knocking anybody for this, but like, not a classical, not an Okinawan, not a classical karate, but like a strip mall karate, right? You can line up people. You can line up 50 in a room, line up 500 in a room, whatever, and people can relatively easily follow along. Mm-hmm. And the adjustments are pretty easy to make, but they're doing the movement. They don't necessarily understand how to use it for self-defense or, even something more like power generation. I really feel like these older systems had smaller classes. And you've used this analogy, and I love this too. Like the craft. They crafted their students like a coffee or like a handmade mahogany table.
Like a homebrew.
Like a homebrew, yeah. Home crafted students, right? But you could take the time to not only distill the essence of what the system was, but tailor it to each of these students.
Sure.
And so not only was it the student, not only did the student have to get wedged into the mold of the system, but at some point there was a marrying of the two, where it was also that the student got to use, attributes that were, essential to them. Maybe they were stronger, maybe they were taller, maybe they were quicker.
Sure.
And the system gets, tailored a little bit to that individual student. Because I look at, some of the core students of Yip Man, and they all were known for something different, unique, and special to them. And their movements and their understanding of the form and the quality of the form that they produce, and the students that each one of them has this little bit of a different flavor. It's like, oh yeah, okay, that's the same soup. But, it says Wing Chun on the side, but they're using different ingredients.
Sure.
And some people are cooking it less long, or some people are, flash frying some chicken and then throwing it in there, all these different things to make up what that unique person's perspective of a principle-based system is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very sort of, Baguazhang, Donghai Chuan model, right? Because he initially had... he wouldn't take students unless they had sort of mastered a different student or different style. And so Chung Ting Hua was like a guy who could throw, and then In Fu was a guy who had done like a Shaolin, and like all of his students were all really good at other systems. And so he took the principles of what he was doing and he really kind of molded it around what each one of them was already good at. And, I always laugh because there's some speculation that initially he's the one who taught In Fu Shaolin.
Right. I've heard that too.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's true or not, but that's what I've heard. And I always wonder if he was like, oh, hell no, I ain't teaching anybody basics again. Forget about it.
This is a one-time thing.
Yeah. He's just okay, that was a real pain in the ass. How about I just get guys who are already really good at something else?
Yeah, exactly. He was the model.
Yeah.
And as a teacher, he's like, no more. I loved our conversation that we just had a little while ago with Sifu Russ. And he's like, I love it, but God damn it, at some point, I don't want to teach the fucking basics anymore.
Right. Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong. Exactly. And there it is again. Mm-hmm. That's a teacher that's been teaching for a long time.
Yeah.
Right. And you're going to get to a point, this era, this period, your blue period, your red period, if you will.
Sure. Back to our Miles Davis analogy.
Back to the Miles Davis stuff. It's
Picasso.
Like Picasso. Exactly. It's just like, okay, I've taught enough basics. Here's my guys. These 4 guys over here, if you want to learn the basics of what I teach, go to those guys.
Right. Yep.
And then when you're ready and they feel that you're ready, you come talk to me.
Yep.
Because I'm working on this over here, and this is what I've trained my whole life, and this is what I've taught my whole life to understand this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I really like that because it's like if, it's like if you want to learn the basics, the intermediate stuff, go to those guys because I'm teaching those guys the advanced stuff.
That's right.
Right. And I mean, that's how the model kind of should stack up over time, and I think from a cultural perspective, my understanding is that if you have an older teacher, they're not going to take younger students because it's culturally in China that's just sort of you don't do it, right? Because there's a generational thing there. So technically, if you had a younger student, that student would study with your students, not you.
The uncle models, as they're called, go train with your older uncle.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So, I know that there, a lot of people are like, oh, well, this person was the youngest student of the master, and I'm like, well, that's okay. That may be good. It may not be good. It sort of depends on what the flavor of the master was at the time.
This guy was 95 and
exactly.
he was 3 years old.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's 90 years, yo. I mean, was the master, they're both changing diapers at that point. You know what I mean? I mean, there's still diapers involved on both ends of it. So how much kung fu and how much learning is actually being done?
For sure. I mean, we've touched on this before in terms of like the iteration of a teacher's teaching, but like an older teacher's, I mean, they've already, like when you learn from them, you have to take it with a grain of salt. You have to understand that like, okay, this may be the old master, right? This is everybody especially in our society is like the old master, right? This guy's obviously got the shit. Yeah. Maybe he has the shit, but guess what? When he teaches it to you, he's not going to do the low horse stances. He's not going to do the fucking hard training. He already did all the hard training. He already did it. He doesn't need to do it. It's in his nervous system. It's in his body. He got the lesson. He's moved on.
Yeah, but you do.
Yeah, exactly. But you need to do it. And so I think that becomes the problem later on is you have students who are studying with older masters and they're like, oh man, this is the shit because this guy's 1,000 years old. Okay, maybe. I mean, maybe from a theoretical perspective, that might be right. If it's an open teacher and somebody who's really being upfront, but physically, maybe you want to try to find one of his senior students who's maybe, in their 50s, maybe somebody who's really, still physically together, but has been doing it for a while. And then, maybe you can get some of the other elements, the deeper stances and the meaning of the deeper training or maybe the fight training or something from a different generation.
That makes me wonder too, is maybe some of these internal arts, the reason that there's, some people are so heavily loaded down with like combat and the others are heavily loaded down with the essential chi-based theory is because they were learning at different periods from these teachers, and as you get older, I want to focus on, extending my life. Yeah. I want to focus on the joints. Yeah. I want to focus on energy practice because I don't have a whole lot of energy through the day. So I need something that's going to cultivate that. Right. And so, when we look at it, are you looking at it through the lens of, okay, well, this system is only chi based and this one's only fighting? Or are we looking at it through the lens also of what period were you studying with that person and what were they teaching?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question.